Hi everyone, and welcome to video number 4 on Warfare Through Time. And this video, ladies and gentlemen, it's our first case study. Remember, throughout the course we're going to examine in detail 7 key battles, 7 case studies. And this is the first one, 1298, the Battle of Falkirk. So it's pretty much still in the early medieval period, and we can use some of the previous videos, the nature of war, the experience of war, and see what was actually happening in real life examples. 1298, the Battle of Falkirk. Now, to give you a bit of background about it. Basically, it's England fighting Scotland. The Scots did not want to succumb. They did not want to be controlled by England. The King of England, a man called King Edward I, very tall man, over 6'2", which was quite tall in those days. And he had a nickname, Longshanks. Shanks was the old-fashioned word for legs, long legs, so he was a big man. But he also had a second nickname, and that was the Hammer of the Scots, because he was determined that England would control and take over Scotland. So he wanted to defeat or hammer the Scots, nicknamed the Hammer of the Scots. Now, many of the Scottish nobles did not want this, and they got together and they were led by a man called William Wallace. Now, Wallace led the Scottish army against King Edward and the English army. And the year previous, 1297, William Wallace had defeated the English army at the Battle of Stirling Bridge. So it was a very tight affair. The Scots did have a good army, but Edward was determined that he was going to win and control Scotland. So the year after the Battle of Stirling Bridge, Edward is there again, fighting again, 1298, the Battle of Falkirk. Now, what actually happened in the battle? Well, let's start with nature of war. Remember I said the composition of the armies. Now I've done this for you, hopefully to help you understand. Now here we have, at the top here, we have the wood, calendar wood, and the orange, this bit here, for those of us who might be a bit colourblind, the orange, this is the Scottish army. The purple, the ones at the bottom, that is King Edward's English army. And if you look, you will see there are different types of soldiers. The Scottish had some cavalry. So did the English. The Scottish had archers. So did the English, the longbows. The English had infantry, and so did the Scottish, these 4 orange circles. So that is how the battle was laid out. Now, when we talk about composition of army, one of the key things we have to do is understand the numbers. Altogether, the purple, the English army, about 14,000 men. The Scottish, 10,000. So there, straight away, we see maybe a factor. England had 4,000 more soldiers in their army. How was the army made up? Well, the English army, 2,000 cavalry. Remember, the top soldiers, the top knights, the bannerets. 2,000 cavalry. The Scottish had 500. So you see, there might be an advantage there for the English. Infantry. The English army, round about 12,000 infantry soldiers. The Scottish, about 9,500. So again, an advantage for the English army. Of the English army, 12,000 infantry, about 5,000 of those 12,000 were firing the longbow, and about 500 were firing the crossbow. Up in the Scottish army, of their 9,500 infantry, they had about 1,500 archers. So straight away we see there is a definite advantage for the English. They had more soldiers, more cavalry, more infantry, more archers. So, if you look though, William Wallace, he was quite a good leader. Remember, he'd won at Stirling Bridge. He's made a good decision. He has put his Scottish army on top of the hill, or on top of a ridge. So Edward was at a disadvantage because he's at the bottom. If he sends his troops to attack, which he did, not only did they have to cross streams, but they had to cross a marsh here, and they had to move uphill. So that's a good start for William Wallace. He has put his army in a good place. Remember, it was important to try and outmaneuver your opponent. So that was a good decision for William Wallace. He made a second good decision, ladies and gentlemen. If you look on the plan here, you'll see these 4 circles. Now, they were called schiltrons. They are infantry soldiers. Normally, the infantry would face the enemy with a wall of shields tightly together, and the shield, bigger than this, the shield would create like a wall for protection. William Wallace is trying a new tactic. Notice that word new, so it's a bit of a change, ladies and gentlemen. The schiltron. Now, what were the schiltrons? Well, they're a little bit like this shape. Okay? And round the edge, they had very, very tightly packed men, foot soldiers, infantry, but sticking out, they would have very, very long spears or spikes. So if you like, what William Wallace has tried to do is create a wall of spears. It'd be a bit like a hedgehog trying to get in and attack. So the schiltrons, these infantry soldiers with a wall of spikes, they were a second good decision by William Wallace. So before the battle has started, William Wallace has made 2 good decisions. Now let's have a look at the actual events of the battle. Now then, King Edward makes his first decision. He sends the cavalry up the ridge. And he sends them to the flanks, the sides. So we've got English cavalry here, and we've got English cavalry over here. That is his first decision. Now, attacking from the side, particularly the Scottish cavalry, it was tricky for them to get up the ridge, but once they are up there, they attack from the side, from the flanks. Now, remember I said in one of my previous videos that the top knights were often given command because they were rich and powerful and famous. Now at the Battle of Falkirk, King Edward uses his 2 top knights, his top bannerets, the Earl of Surrey and the Earl of Lincoln. And they attack. Now they are a little bit undisciplined. It could have gone wrong, but they get a little bit of luck. When they attack up here, the Scottish cavalry, remember, they are outnumbered. Some of the Scottish cavalry were maybe not that loyal to William Wallace, and the Scottish cavalry retreated. They ran away. So that was a first victory in the first stage of the battle. The English cavalry, although they were a little bit undisciplined, they were lucky. They got lucky, and the Scottish cavalry ran away. Very famously in history, another very famous man, Napoleon Bonaparte, he actually said, "I would rather have a general who was lucky than one who was good." And King Edward got a little bit of luck here. Although his cavalry weren't that well disciplined, they got the right result. They were a little bit lucky. The Scottish cavalry ran away. Edward then issues his second order, his second decision. It's all about decisions, ladies and gentlemen. He tells his cavalry to attack the archers. Okay, now that also was a good decision because the archers were vulnerable. They are on the ground level. The cavalry are up high up on a horse. So that was good. the Scottish archers were attacked by the English cavalry. Some of the archers were killed. Some of the archers ran away into Callender Wood. Some of the archers ran inside the schiltrons. Remember I said it's a little bit like that. You've got the wall of spikes on the outside, but there's a gap in the middle. So some of the archers ran into the schiltrons for protection. Okay? So again, the battle seems to be going well for Edward. The Scottish cavalry have ran away. The Scottish archers have either run away, been killed, or had to run inside the schiltrons. Edward now makes another decision, decision number 3. He tells his English cavalry to attack the schiltrons. This was not a good move, because the schiltrons, the men in there were well disciplined. They were determined. They were well armed. There was no way through for the horses. The wall of spears, the wall of spikes, was rebuffing the English cavalry. Things look as if they are going wrong for Edward. The schiltrons are doing their job. Then we get the key decision of all. Edward tells his longbows, remember 5,000 men, to fire into the schiltrons. Okay? Now the men in the schiltrons, they did not have much protection. They weren't wearing any armour, they had no helmets. Therefore, the volley of arrows landing on the schiltrons begins to cause huge damage. Gaps start to appear in the wall of spikes as the men are killed. That gives the cavalry the chance to recharge, because now that the wall of spears is not as effective. That was the key to the Battle of Falkirk. The longbows destroying the power of the schiltrons. The cavalry then get in. The schiltrons are weakened. Edward then says, right, now let's send in my infantry. Hand-to-hand fighting. The melee. Very, very brutal fighting. The schiltrons, the men in the schiltrons, some of them only had the long spears, but the long spears are no good in hand-to-hand fighting. Therefore, the English infantry and the English cavalry begin to mop up because of the damage caused by the English longbowmen. The schiltrons break. Some try and run into Callender Wood for safety. The English cavalry use their second key tactic. Remember, the first one is charge. The second one, from a previous video, rout and chase. And anyone who is running from the battlefield will be hunted down by the cavalry. The battle lasted 2 or 3 hours. It was a victory for the English. Estimates of the dead of the Scottish army, anywhere between 2,000 and 5,000. Remember, they only had 10,000 to start with, so maybe as many as 50%. The English lost a lot less. So they are the key events of case study number 1, the Battle of Falkirk. A couple of questions for us, ladies and gentlemen. Here's a GCSE question. I'll remove King Edward's crown and put on my GCSE question hat. I'm a teacher. Well, retired teacher. So here I am. That's better. Here's a GCSE question they might ask you. Here we go. Edward's decisions were the main reason for the English victory at the Battle of Falkirk. Edward's decisions, the main reason for the English victory. How far do you agree with this statement? Now, that's a typical 16-mark question. They would give you 2 bullet points, 2 clues that you could write about. Obviously, Edward's decisions. Well, I've shown you the decisions in this video. Decision 1, send in the cavalry. Decision 2, get the cavalry to attack and destroy the Scottish cavalry, attack the archers, and then attack the schiltrons. Most of those decisions worked well, apart from attacking the schiltrons. But then Edward made another decision. He used his longbows, the 5,000 archers, to send the arrows into the schiltrons. That was the key point. That was the key decision. So you could say, yes, Edward's decisions were very important, but they would give you other clues to write about. What else could you write about? The size, the composition of the armies. Remember, England, 14,000. Scotland, 10,000. You could write about that and say how Edward has got an advantage. In this video, I've given you the breakdown. Edward had more cavalry than William, and William's cavalry ran away. Edward had more archers than William Wallace. Edward had more infantry than William Wallace. So you could say that maybe that played a part. You could look at William Wallace and say, well, what were the decisions he made? He made two good decisions at the start, to put his men on the ridge and to use schiltrons, but then things went wrong. He had a smaller army. Was that his fault? He did not protect his flanks. He was attacked on the flanks. Good decision by Edward, bad decision by William. The Scottish cavalry and the Scottish archers, not very effective on the day. Edward's cavalry, Edward's archers, very, very effective. What else could you write about? Well, you could say the position of the armies. Even though Edward was at the bottom of the ridge, things went well for him because of the decisions, or because of the size, or because of William's mistakes. You could mention, look, his cavalry was undisciplined, but he got away with it because the Scottish cavalry ran away. So you would look at a whole range. Yes, you'd talk about Edward's decisions. You'd also talk about the size and composition of the army, maybe a bit of luck, and also William's decisions. The Battle of Falkirk. There it is for you. Now, remember what I said. We are examining different battles throughout different parts of the course, because it can give us an idea of the changes that were beginning to occur. Now, the key points from the Battle of Falkirk. Cavalry. Cavalry had always been very, very important in medieval history. The warfare up to this point, the cavalry had been dominant. What about in the Battle of Falkirk? Well, yes, they did play a part, and they did play a significant part, particularly early on in the battle. Also at the end, rout and chase. But something in this battle showed that the cavalry were about to decline in importance. What was it? It was the schiltrons. Although William lost the battle, he showed that pikes, effective use of pikes, begin to make cavalry a bit more ineffective. Cavalry were no longer totally dominant. The use of schiltrons, the use of pikes, is beginning to suggest that cavalry will begin to lose its importance. That's a change, ladies and gentlemen. That is a change. Second point, another key development from the Battle of Falkirk. The emergence of the archers, particularly the longbow. The longbow was very, very effective. It was the key turning point in the battle, because the longbow begins to destroy the power of the schiltrons. And the schiltrons had been holding up the cavalry. So the archers, the longbow, for the next 150 years or so, the longbow begins to become a very key part of warfare. That's another change. Finally, the impact of the Battle of Falkirk on civilians, experience of warfare. Well, both sides, particularly in the infantry, many soldiers in the infantry were civilians, agricultural labourers who decided that being paid 2p a day, which was more than their normal wages, was worth the risk. So there's the experience straight away. It was better pay than their normal jobs, so they would go and fight. And they are experiencing warfare. Of course, the English army was up in Scotland. Well, how would it be fed? How would they get the food and provisions necessary for such a big army, 14,000 men? Well, Edward was clever. He'd marched up the east coast so he could be supplied by the sea. But when he's up there in Scotland, again, they've got to raid the local land, loot, plunder, take the castles, destroy land, destroy towns. So here we see the impact of warfare would be negative for the people in Scotland near where Edward's army was marching to the battle. Crops would be lost, either eaten or destroyed. So there's the impact. So that's our first video on the case studies, the Battle of Falkirk. In a few videos' time, we'll do the second medieval battle, the Battle of Agincourt, and then we'll be able to see a bit more clearly what has changed and what has stayed the same by comparing those two battles. Hope the video was useful on the Battle of Falkirk. There is a film called Braveheart. Historically, it's terribly inaccurate, ladies and gentlemen, but it is about this period of history. It is about William Wallace and King Edward. And William Wallace is played by an actor called Mel Gibson. And it gets a little bit of the Hollywood treatment. So historically, it's not a particularly accurate assessment or portrayal of what went on. But in some ways, it is quite an interesting and exciting and entertaining film. So there's the Battle of Braveheart, the Battle of Falkirk. As ever, I hope it's been useful. Speak to you soon. All the best now.